How to set up your fighting rifle, long range edition. You guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been quite some time. The goal of this video today is to help demystify the discipline of long range shooting, as well as to break down the equipment that you may need or may not need, as well as the concepts to understand to be successful out to distance, as well as when it comes to either buying a rifle out of the box or building one to ensure that it's not only capable of consistency out to distance, but also as a fighting rifle tool. It's going to be a long video, so let's begin. Before we begin, we must define what is long range. Well, this is relative as it depends upon the caliber, barrel length that you're shooting. But for any center fire, small action cartridge such as 5.56 or 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, it'll be distances that I think most people can agree on between 700 yards to 1,000, and there's some play between those two and whatnot. But these are the distances in which your bullet will have effect on it with wind, with spin drift, and other environmental factors that you need to account for. That having been defined, let's now discuss the rifle platform. Here to do that, I have my Accuracy International AT. Phenomenal rifle. And I'll break down why I chose it in a minute. But first, I want to discuss bolt actions over semi-autos. And to keep it short and brief, if you are a newer shooter to long range, absolutely go with a bolt action. It'll be harder for you to pursue those hasty, sloppy follow-up shots when every time you pull the trigger, you have to manually unlock and re-wrap the bolt every time. So a bolt action, keep it simple. You know, these rifles are made from the ground up. Generally, most modern rifles are made from the ground up to be precise. There's less moving parts, there's less things to think about, less weapons maintenance. Obviously, AR-10s have come a long way. Your SR-25s, LMTs, your Seekins, Scars, and whatnot. Phenomenal rifle platforms, and obviously very capable, very reliable, which puts them definitely in the category as a fighting rifle, close, mid, long range. But if you're a newer shooter, if you're new to long range shooting, even intermediate, I still believe if I had to have one rifle, it would be a bolt action. Now, why did I choose an Accuracy International for my one and only precision bolt gun? Well, we're all kind of familiar with the rifle's aesthetic. It looks like the L96A1, it looks like the Arctic Warfare, and that's because this is the direct successor of those rifles. But a quick breakdown on Accuracy International and the lore of it all. If you haven't seen the video with Ian McCollum breaking it down, stop watching this and go watch that video. The skinny of it is, back when England was conducting their military trials to replace the L42A1, Accuracy International, a manufacturing company made, by a couple of guys in a shed, I believe it was, submitted the PM, the original Arctic Warfare. And the rifle's made to be accurate. Not just accurate, but also dependable. As a military rifle, it needs to perform not just for competition sporting purposes, but also be dependable, in austere environments, rain, mud, ice, dirt, and so on. And I can say that I have never in the, 3,000 rounds, not a million, I know, but 3,000 or so rounds I put through this AT and the other AT I've owned before it. I've never had a single malfunction, weapons related. They are truly impressive rifles. On top of just phenomenal aesthetics, there are some great features, even with this older style. For those of you who don't know, the AT has been discontinued. I believe it was last year, maybe 23, but it's been succeeded by the ATX and now the ATXC. But you can still find ATs floating around. That having been said, the rifle here features a stock system, or what Accuracy International calls skins. Skins are the side panels that can be removed with a couple of Allen keys, so you can swap on green, black, or remove these inserts to put in Picatinny mounts for laser rangefinders, all that kind of stuff. And of course, with the aftermarket, you have options out here, such as ARCA for the bottom or for the spigot for the bipod. But overall, very phenomenal rifle. Not the most feature-rich, like say you want to adjust the length of pull or the cheek riser height. It is a bit of a pain. But the aesthetics and the features aside, what is the performance like with an Accuracy International? Is it everything it's hyped up to be? Yes. These are sub-MOA rifles all day with the right ammunition. I mean, even some cheaper stuff I put through them. They are very accurate. To speak on that, when I first bought this rifle, the 6.5 barrel had about 1,200 rounds on it. As of now, it has just over 3,000. When I was first getting my data on it, I was getting 0.3 MOA groups at 100 yards, 7-shot groups. These rifles are phenomenally accurate. Not just accurate, but very consistent. I mentioned the quick change barrel function. With just removing this one crossbolt right here, you can unscrew about 1,000,000 threads and then thread in another barrel, lock it in and torque it properly, and you'll have little to no, I'm talking no point of impact shift. I've tested this as well as others out there like Sawyer Clark Shooter. Check out his YouTube channel. Phenomenal guy and great shooter. But a lot of folks have tested this. The point of impact shift with the barrel swaps, even just removing the same barrel and then putting it back in and torquing it, no point of impact shift, if not 1/10 of a mil. These rifles are very repeatable. And as I mentioned, in the 3,000 plus rounds I put through them, no issues whatsoever. So great aesthetics aside, the performance of these rifles is true and proven. That being said, there are others out there. You have Barrett with the MRAD, the Mark 22, the ASR, PSR. Phenomenal rifle. It does give you short action and long action capability. There is the AXSR, as mentioned, Accuracy International, but it's about twice the price, if not more, than the Barrett MRAD. Another option is Sako, kind of like the Accuracy International of Finland. All these rifles, you guys, are around, I want to say like 5,000 or more. Obviously used as a market in and of itself, but you're looking at around 5,000 to 6,000 for these rifle platforms. That being said, what are some more budget or economical rifles to look into? Well, from Sako, you have Tikka, their subsidiary company. And as far as I understand it, they're all made in the same factory. When it comes to a consistent, reliable bolt gun, Tikka is just really hard to beat, you guys. But let's say you don't want to build the rifle out, you don't want to have to buy an action and then add on a stock or chassis. You just want to buy it out of the box and it's ready to go, no further modifications, no discussion. What I'd recommend is the Seekins Hit. Right now, they're in their 3rd generation that allows for a quick change barrel function, kind of like the Accuracy Internationals. So if you ever need to swap calibers or you shoot out a barrel, which is pretty much what I'm getting towards on this guy, the Seekins allow you to avoid having to rebarrel a rifle and send it off to a gunsmith and all that fun stuff. So out of the box rifle chassis system, sub MOA, bag rider built in, slots for weights and all that stuff for your PRS guys. The Seekins is a phenomenal way to go as well. Another option, the most budget, maybe most economical out of everything, would be the Bergara series of rifles. The HMR, I think, is the more budget line. These rifles utilize the Remington 700 footprint, which has been around for decades. The folks I know who have both the Bergaras and Tikkas say they prefer the Tikkas, so take that for what you will. I've never used a Bergara, but I have shot a Tikka CTR T3X a couple of times, and it was a pleasure to shoot. I'm looking forward to buying one down the road. So to recap, you have Accuracy International, Barrett, Sako as your sort of tier 1 precision platforms. But you also, again, you have Tikka, you have Bergara, you have Seekins, Masterpiece Arms. There's a lot of great manufacturers out there who produce quality actions and barrels that you can upgrade on, down the road, or just buy it out of the box and it's ready to go. And it'll have a long life with a lot of accessories. But as far as which caliber is best for you, a novice long-range shooter or someone who wants to have a long-range capable rifle that has popular rounds out there, in stores and just accessibility overall, 308 and 6.5 Creedmoor are what I would look into, but I would recommend 6.5 personally for a few reasons. The first one is cost. For a match grade 308, 175 grain Sierra Match King, you're looking at like $1.80, $2 a round. And there's some other stuff out there that doesn't have to be from Federal that's very accurate, but in my experience and the experience of others, it costs more to feed quality 308 ammunition through a long-range gun than it does 6.5. I can find Bowtail hollow point rounds for 6.5 under $1, $1.15, $1.30. It kind of comes down to where you shop, but on the same websites, the same people, you're paying more for 308 that does a comparable job that the 6.5 does for a lot less. So the cost is one factor. You don't want to have a rifle that you can't afford to even shoot. Now, another consideration apart from cost is the learning curve for long-range shooting. 308, you really need to know your wind calls for those extended distances. So it's a phenomenal cartridge for improving your wind call reading, but it's going to recoil a bit more, and it's going to take more vertical compensation because the trajectory is just a little bit less efficient. And as I mentioned, it's more susceptible towards the wind. So to make good use of 308, you need to be on your game. And as a new level shooter, 6.5 is a bit more forgiving. As the meme says, 6.5 bucks wind. It's not just a meme, it's actually true. 6.5 bucks wind. And when it comes to learning your fundamentals, getting them dialed in, and then pushing the envelope on your understanding of bullet arc and bullet drop, 308 is a great cartridge to kind of dive into. The only merits I can really give to 308 are the accessibility of the rounds. That being said, the accessibility of 308 that I see out there at stores and online is for plinking ammunition. You know, your Full Metal Jacket, M80 ball type rounds, which have no place in long range shooting because they're simply not consistent enough to be relied upon out to distance. So yeah, it's more accessible. The barrel life also for 308 is higher. I want to say it's around 8 to 10,000 rounds on average lifespan for 308. That being said, most folks will never shoot out a barrel. And to shoot out like a 6.5 barrel, you're spending a lot more than the price of the barrel on all the ammunition to even get there. So to wrap it up, I'd recommend 6.5 over 308. Another option, honorable mention, would be 5.56. I came up shooting long range with my 5.56 SPR that you've seen in the first video. You want to shoot your 77 grain Sear Match Kings, you know, your match grade ammunition for 5.56. It really matters. You know, I would say the effective range of those kinds of guns, like my Mark 12, you know, would be around 600 to 900 yards. You know, I can push it farther. I pushed a 16-inch, you know, Knights out to 1,200 yards, but you're really walking your shots in at that distance, and it's not very consistent. So 5.56, great introductory cartridge if you already own a, you know, an AR-15 or some bolt action in 5.56. Not a bad way to go at all. But 308 or 6.5, 6.5 preferably is what I'd recommend. So with the ammunition out of the way, let's discuss the rifle a bit more, starting with the scope. The scope, you guys, is very important. I would rather you spend a majority of your budget on the best scope you can afford over, you know, the fanciest, coolest rifle. So to break down scopes, right here, this is a Nightforce 7-35 Attacker. It is a very reliable, very repeatable optic, meaning that if I dial to 9 mils and I dial to 5 and I dial back up to 9, it will be at 9. You know, there are cheaper scopes out there, more budget scopes that the tracking isn't true on them. You know, you'll dial to 5 mils, but really you're about 5.2. And that kind of messes with your dope. Not kind of, it messes with your dope out to distance. So the tracking of the turrets is very important. Also the quality of the turrets. You know, you don't want to have mushy, vague turrets. I could be down with a scope and I can hear those clicks. And I know what I'm doing. So the quality of the turrets is one thing. You know, you don't gotta buy a Schmidt and Bender or a Tangent Theta to get quality turrets. As it pertains to scopes, you wanna have a repeatable, reliable scope. Between your rifle scopes, you guys, you have first and second focal plane. The key points to take away from a first versus second focal plane optic will be these two things. Number one, with a first focal plane, your reticle will scale in size as you go through the magnification range. So as you are on max magnification, you have a lot more information to work with than you did at the lowest magnification. This is so that you can make those long range shots. You have holdovers that you can utilize. That's why you see these Christmas tree reticles. So as you go up magnification, you have more information for those shots. Whereas second focal plane, that reticle, it is the exact same at 1 power as it is at 10 power. The other key thing to understand about first versus second focal plane optics is the holdovers. Whatever magnification you're at when you zero a second focal plane optic, that is where the holdovers are true. So if you zero at 6 power, the max magnification for that scope, the 1 mil, you know, holdovers are only true at 6 power. Whereas the first focal plane, those holdovers are true throughout the entire magnification range. In my opinion, second focal plane optics have no real place in long range shooting. That's my opinion. You know, it makes a lot more sense in a hunting context or for like an AR-15 where you don't mind having an LPVO. So that being said, first focal plane is what I would go with. That is what most manufacturers are making their scopes in for any kind of long range shooting. For long range shooting, you know, you commonly see either crosshair style reticles or the Christmas tree style reticle. There's a lot of great stuff out there. What I have here is the Mil XT. This is a Nightforce's Christmas tree Mil style reticle. I have it in both the 7-35 here as well as on the 4-16 Attacker on my Mark 12. You also have, you know, the Loophole PR2. You also have the famous Horus family of Christmas tree reticles, you know, the H59, the Tremor 3, and so on. And which one is best for you comes down to the purpose of the rifle. That being said, I do want to touch on the Mil XT for a second versus the Tremor 3, because I have a lot of time with Tremor 3 and the Mil XT as well. And I've switched both these rifles over from the Tremor 3 to the Mil XT, and I'll tell you why. You know, I bought the Tremor 3 because I thought at the time, most professionals, you know, military, law enforcement shooters are using the Tremor 3. Therefore, there must be, a good reason for it, which there is, but I thought, that would apply to me as a civilian and, my purposes. And I found out over time, I just didn't really like the reticle. There's a lot of busyness to it because of the wind dots. And the wind dots serve a great purpose as it pertains to, I think, military context. You have quick, easy to use, rapid engagement wind dots. But when it comes to those farther out distances where you need to dial elevation, well, those wind dots that are taking up so much of your visual screen, your field of view, well, those wind dots, they lose their calibration. So they become less effective. So I found that was a big reason to switch over from Tremor 3 to a less cluttered mill Christmas tree reticle like the Mill XT. If I had a loophole, I'd probably go with the PR2. I had a Zeiss, had a ZF MRI reticle. I love that thing. Overall, whichever reticle you choose is ultimately up to you, your use case, and just preference. But, I just found the Mill XT was a more enjoyable experience for me. Literally, I find it more enjoyable looking at it than the Tremor 3. And I'm not dogging the Tremor 3 or what it's meant for. It's just not meant for what I use my rifles for. So I would do your research, ask others, get good opinions, and look through it if you can before buying it, because you do pay the Horus tax. For an H59, Tremor 3, Tremor 5 reticle, you do pay a considerable upcharge for those reticles over whatever proprietary reticle that manufacturer provides. So moving past the reticle, let's discuss the magnification ranges you want to look into. On this rifle, I have a 7-35, and I rarely use 35 power. I really only use it if I am zeroing. It's great for zeroing, or for spotting for someone else. But for the engagement distances I use this rifle for, 1,000 to 1,200 yards, I'm never really past 25 power, usually around 20. You don't need to have max magnification at all times. That's actually an issue in and of itself for newer shooters. But the reason that you want to go for like a 7-35, a 6-36, the reason I have is because the mid-range on these scopes, the 15 to 25, is very good. Where if you bought a 5 to 25 power, that top end of that magnification will be the least forgiving in terms of both the eye relief and the glass clarity. What you see as the shooter. It becomes less clear, there's less light, and again, the eye relief, the eye box becomes very tight and very shallow. I'm not saying 5 to 25 is a bad way to go about it. A lot of scopes are in that magnification range, but 6 to 36 or 7 to 35, great ways to go about it. I find that on a long-range rifle, a large frame rifle, I should say, 7 to 35 makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't be upset with the 5 to 25 on this. I wouldn't be, but I really do enjoy the 7 to 35. Lower power scopes, those 3 to 18, 4 to 16, 4 to 20, they're really at home on like your 5.56 or 6 arc, those smaller cartridges. That's my opinion. That's just a magnification range for you to kind of get a gauge on and then go from there to find what's best for you. But again, I use a 7-35 because of those reasons. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention scope mounts. The scope mount I have here on my AT is from Spur. The exact model is the SP4602C. It has 20 MOA built into it, meaning that it has more elevation built into it for longer shots than a 0 MOA scope mount. I'm not going to break that down, too much minutia. But essentially, this is a Spur unibody mount. Spur makes phenomenal mounts. They're a little pricey, but they come with a lot of configurability. Nice feature as well is the built-in bubble level. Bubble levels, you guys, you want to have some kind of anti-cant device on your long-range rifle. If you're kind of off to an angle at 100 yards, that's one thing, but that really does pile up. It accumulates. I understand that the Spur mount is particularly expensive. You don't have to go out and buy a Spur, but if you do, you know that the tolerances, the features, everything are there and they're solid. But other options are out there, guys. You have rings, of course. You have cantilever-style mounts. Of course, Spur, but you have Night Force, Loophole, Badger Ordnance, Reptilia, and so on. It may not be what's available at the local gun store, but it's worth doing your homework on and buying once and crying once, in my opinion. Now, with scopes wrapped up, let's discuss the other components of this rifle right here. We have the bipod, of course, but we have the suppressor. Let's talk about suppressors for a minute. When it comes to your muzzle devices, you guys, you have either the choice of a muzzle brake or a suppressor. On a fighting rifle, I'd recommend a suppressor for a multitude of reasons. If your state allows it or you can afford it, definitely invest in a suppressor. It'll make the experience not only more pleasant for you, but it'll reduce your signature dramatically. A muzzle brake, on top of just making the experience, flatter for you behind the gun, but obviously worse for everybody around you, tinnitus. Muzzle brakes have a bit of a fireball effect to them, as well as kicking up a lot of dirt and debris in your environment. I can recall an instance where I had a muzzle brake, no tarp beneath me or anything, and I was shooting in the desert. and I thought that my scope had just, broken, or I did something wrong. I thought I was looking at the sky after I broke the shot, because it was just white. It was kind of an overcast sort of day. And then I realized it was just all of the dirt that was right in front of me. As soon as I broke the shot, I lost my entire sight picture. So, they have a place, definitely. You should be cognizant of the environment you're shooting in. But as far as, tactical, scenarios go, muzzle brakes are very loud. They're very concussive. It's easy to kind of pinpoint the direction that they're coming from. And the fireball effect is real. At this point, I covered most of the rifle, everything apart from the bipod. So let's briefly discuss bipods. This is the Atlas Cal, the BT65. The adapter on here is from Really Right Stuff. It allows me to use Arca as well as Picatinny. Great piece of equipment. Really Right Stuff makes great stuff. It's just very expensive. But this bipod is phenomenal. I recommend the Cal, the Canton lock, over the BT46 because for larger frame rifles, you think like your AR-10s or your precision rifles, it is canting and locking. So you have a little bit of cant side to side, but you don't have any panning. So when you're trying to get a stable position, you can be kind of fighting, those bipods that offer you some panning. I like the panning feature on the Mark 12 and other, smaller frame rifles. But if I want consistency and stability out to a, extended distance, 1,200 plus yards, I don't want to be fighting the rifle from panning side to side, which way or the other. So the locking legs, the locking cant, great way to go about it. I'm a big fan of Atlas bipods. I think they come in at a really good, kind of a happy middle ground. They're feature rich. You can adjust the bipod legs to absorb recoil on, odd terrain and that sort of stuff. But they come in at a reasonable price, $200 to $300, a little bit more depending on the mount, where, you have other bipods out there. You have the Thunder Beast, you have the Accutax, the PsychPod, and so on. Great bipods, no doubt about it, but they're a bit expensive for bipods, even for me and my taste. If I didn't want to spend the money for the Atlas, I'd probably go for a Harris, but you lose a lot of features with the Harris. It's really nice when you're down on the gun, when you're adjusting the length of the bipod legs, that you can do with just one hand. You can just pull it down wherever you need it, raise it up. It's really easy. With Harris's, it's more of a two-handed operation, which necessitates that you break your position. Again, other great bipods out there, just it depends on how much you want to spend. Let's talk about support equipment for a minute. This is your tripods and your shooting bags and that kind of stuff, your rear bags. I have a couple different rear bags that I use, and I'll walk you through them real fast on which ones I like and why I use them. This right here is the Armageddon Gear Game Changer. Phenomenal bag, very versatile. I use the medium size with the light fill. I find that the heavy fill, when you're prone, it's a real pain. If you're bench rest shooting, it's not bad. But this guy is very handy. You can use it to tuck the rifle's buttstock between the sides of it for zeroing and whatnot. Or you can rest it on top, move it flat to use it as like over like a tree limb or any kind of barricade and put the rifle on top of it. It's a very versatile bag. Another bag I use, also from Armageddon Gear, is the Squishy, which as you can see is very squishy, very malleable. I use it probably the second most, just behind the Game Changer if I need a little bit less bag. But it's very versatile as well, because you can obviously use it horizontally, but if you need more elevation, just move it vertically. It's a great bag. It's very light as well. So if you need to throw it into a pack and space is a premium, the Game Changer won't fit in there, whatever it is, you just want to have something, this is a good way to go as well. The third and last bag I own is from Weebad, if I'm saying that correctly. This is the Cube, which as you can see is circular but very cube-esque. It's a very large bag. I find that it's probably best for like bench rest F-class style shooting where you need a lot of height and a lot of space to be on the gun. When you build your position, whether it's prone or bench rest, whatever it is, if you can use a rear bag, absolutely use a rear bag. It eliminates a lot of the side-to-side sway you have naturally, and it affords you those little micro adjustments you need to be right on target. Tripods, you guys, I'll speak on this, my experience. I was shooting with some friends back in Utah, and I thought tripods were the coolest thing. And then I bought one, and I realized how difficult it is to be accurate off of a tripod. It's a great tool to add some elevation if you have some tall grass or awkward terrain where you need to get the gun off the ground. But you need to be dialed in on your fundamentals. It's very difficult to get a long standing shot off of a tripod. But if you want to make your shots even harder, make a known distance more difficult, it's a great way to go about it. This tripod right here is from Leophoto. It is the ST364CL. I bought it, I don't know, a year and a half ago off of Optic for like 400 off of a discount. And it has a Arca and Picatinny adapter with the ball head. Uses a tension knob. Carbon fiber tripod. I have some wrap on here to kind of give me more grip, because I found that when I was using the tripod before, just these carbon fiber legs, they're very slick and apparently very noisy as well. Where the wrap makes it a lot more stable, in my opinion. This tripod's been great for me. It hasn't let me down. Could it be more sturdy or lighter? I don't know. I've used a Really Right Stuff tripod with the Anvil 30 head. I thought it was a bit more stable than this Leofoto was, but I didn't notice too much of a difference. But that tripod, Really Right Stuff, they make the best tripods for shooting and photography. Like that's their jam. But those tripods are very expensive, you guys. 4 or 5 times the price of this or any equivalent, budget tier tripod. So if you're considering a tripod, but you don't want to break the bank, I would consider Leofoto. I'd also consider, 2 Vets. There's others out there. You have Vortex and Leupold. I've heard that they're all made in the same factory. You hear that for everything these days. But there are lots of tripods out there that are $1,000 plus that you can get to give you some more capability if you need it, or just to experiment and make some shots more difficult because maybe you got really good at shooting prone or off a bench, whatever it is. With the rifle fully covered, let's dive into the next section, and that's going to be on range finding and ballistic tools necessary to begin making your dope. Beginning with rangefinders. Right here I have the Leica Rangemaster2800.com. Great rangefinder. It's good for, I think, 2,800 yards is what it's rated for. And I've used it successfully out, I think, I want to say 2,500 yards is what I've lased things at. Great, accurate rangefinder. Came in around $650. I've had cheaper rangefinders in the past, Vortex and whatnot. You want to have a quality rangefinder, you guys. Not only because they're more precise in their reading of the distance, you can kind of compare a budget and more advanced rangefinder back to back and see what the difference is. But not only for that, but just for the repeatability. The Vortex that I had, the name escapes me, so I'll put it up on the screen. I believe it was rated for around 1,000 yards, and it was only consistently capable, I should say, of lasing targets out to like 700, 800 yards. I could never laze an actual, target silhouette past that kind of distance. And I would find that out. I'd go up to the range and I'd set up my targets and go back in my position and whatnot and realize I couldn't even tell how far the target was. And you might get impacts at that distance, but you're not really building any kind of data that you can use in the future to know, well, for 800 yards, that was 6.4 mils. You're just kind of guessing, which is a really imprecise, inefficient way to do things. So a quality rangefinder, just any rangefinder, can help save that issue for you, especially when you want to get your zero. You want to zero at either 100 yards or 100 meters. I use yards personally. It's easier to visualize like a football field rather than 84.44 meters. I think it's what it is. But the rangefinder, you guys, this one is phenomenal. Leica makes great stuff. As a monocular style rangefinder, the glass clarity is exceptional. The Vortex that I had a very deep blue notch filter, the coating on the screen. And it just was not very precise or consistent. And this guy has never let me down. I've used it out, like I said, 2,500 yards on a man-sized IPSC. I wasn't shooting it, but I wanted to see how far I could laze it, and this guy did it. I put it into a clamp on my tripod just to make it all the more precise for that really far shot, and it got it. I was very impressed. But there are other laser rangefinders out there, other great brands. You have binoculars, you have the weapon-mounted LRFs as well, which are very convenient to have it on your rifle. However, they are a little clunky. It depends if that fits your use case or whatnot. But I will say that there is a significant downside to a weapon-mounted laser rangefinder in that you need to point your gun at something to range it. Where this guy, I can put it in my pocket and easily range things just like that without any kind of unnecessary flagging. So big fan of the monocular style rangefinder. Binoculars are great too, but I love how handy this is. I've never felt like I was under-equipped with this. And I want to say I paid like $650, $700 for it back in the day, whenever it was. Good friend put me onto these. The next tool we should discuss is the Kestrel. We've all kind of seen it. Some of you might be intimidated by it. Some of you might really like it. I love this thing. And I understand, the learning curve to using it is a little steep, so it just takes time. What the Kestrel is not only a wind meter and thermometer, but it is a ballistic solver. So you can build profiles in here. I think 10 or more on the 5700 Elite. You can build profiles on here for each rifle you have for each offset, each ammunition. It's fantastic. When it comes to ballistic solvers, of course, there's apps on your phone and whatnot, but this guy is just, it's handy, it's precise, it's accurate. I'll put a video up here on the screen of me using it, and maybe I'll overlay my voice on this, maybe I won't, but what the Kestrel does, you guys, is it has an anemometer, the wind meter. See it? There it goes. And that tells you the speed, direction, and all that of the wind. You know, this is basically doing a lot of the work for you. After you built that ballistic profile on the Kestrel, you know, say for my AIAT with Hornady 140s, you know, I can therefore go in there at any time, any location, calibrate it, take my environmentals, and it will do the work for me to say, okay, well, there's this kind of moisture in the air, this is the altitude, this is my degree of fire, okay, this is your ballistic, this is your tailor-made call for this shot. As compared to a range card, which was tailor-made when you pulled it off of that gun, that system on that day. It's like when you look at the velocity numbers on a box ammunition and it says, you know, 2,700 feet per second, but you're getting like 2,500. Well, it's because they're using a 20-inch AR-15 and you have a 14.5. It's the same kind of idea. You know, you have rough numbers. Well, with the Kestrel, the numbers are far more precise. I'm talking first round impacts, if not, you know, they're in the scope, and you can do a second round impact correction easy with the Kestrel. You know, if you do your part on it, this is a very accurate system. There's good reason why military and law enforcement professionals, you know, shooting sports professionals use the Kestrel. I want to say as well that it's a great thing to have in a group of friends. You know, have someone buy, you know, the great rangefinder, someone buy the, you know, the chronograph, which I'll get into here shortly, and someone buy a Kestrel. You can make ballistic profiles for your friends to use. You can give them a range card that'll give them a great starting point to base their shots off of and start building their own dope off of. But again, to wrap things up here, guys, phenomenal system. I would consider it to be not a force multiplier, kind of hate that term, but a real tool to have in your toolbox, guys, as a long range shooter. Let's discuss chronographs for a minute. You know, we've all seen the Magneto Speed, Lab Radar, and whatnot, and I'm sure by this point we've all seen the Garmin 0C1. I love this chronograph. It's just like everybody else in the long range shooting community or reloading community, you know, it's taken me by storm, for lack of a better word. Building that ballistic profile in the Kestrel or your app, whatever you're using, to get that exact muzzle velocity, to build that dope, you need a good chronograph. Another reason you want a chronograph is for the standard deviation that it'll give you of that ammunition you're shooting. It's a great way to compare which ammunition works best in your rifle. Not only so you see, okay, well that one's the fastest or whatever else, but that one is the most consistent. Group size isn't everything. I'll put up a little infographic showing what I'm talking about, but a lot of folks, they believe group size at 100 yards is the end-all be-all for which ammunition is best for them and their rifle. It's easy to get wrapped around the axle about group size, and it definitely has a place as a metric for determining which round, which load is best for your rifle. But another factor, again, is standard deviation. What that is exactly is the average muzzle velocity between the shots that you read on the chronograph. So if you're getting an SD that's in the, I would say, the single digits, you know, you put 10 rounds over the chronograph, 20 rounds, whatever it is, and you average like a single digit SD, you're probably using reloads or you're reloading. You know, that is the ideal SD for long range shooting. It's a very consistent muzzle velocity, meaning that your trajectory out to distance is very consistent. Now, single digit SDs are not very easy to get, or they're not really possible from factory ammunition. You know, it's a little ambitious. But you're most likely to get out of even match grade factory ammunition or teens or low 20s for the SDs. And that's what I consider to be acceptable. Anything under 25 is an acceptable SD for long range shooting. Anything under 20, even better. But I've shot a lot of match grade ammunition, you know, 5.56, 308, 6.5, and so on. And most factory stuff, whether it's, you know, Hornady, Federal, Burger, whatever it is, they're around the low 20s to high teens. And for me, it's been just fine. I'd like it to be lower, but I'm not reloading yet, so it's not really a choice. So if sub 25 is a barrier for match grade ammunition for your rifle, anything over 25, I would continue your load development. Continue checking out new rounds, doing your research. Make sure that you know, your rifle is clean, the conditions are proper to get quality SDs out of that rifle. So to wrap this up, you guys, muzzle velocity, very important. Getting it has never been easier with this chronograph right here. And you need to have that muzzle velocity for a ballistic profile so you can true it. Back to the Kestrel right here. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but this is the best that I've seen. I'm going to try and explain it to you as best as I can, but there are others out there like Ray Helms, His channel, The X Ring, does a phenomenal job walking you through the truing process. So does Kestrel Applied Ballistics on YouTube. But to briefly explain it, because it's not super complicated, it's complicated to do it, but not to say it. You have a ballistic profile on your gun. You get your muzzle velocity off a chronograph. You put it in here, you put in your zeroing range, your ammunition that you're using, the offset, the bore height, all these other factors true to your rifle and how you spec'd it. And it will give you then a predicted truing range, the range in which your rifle goes from, I believe, a supersonic to transonic. And that's kind of where it starts dipping down. And that's a range where you want to tailor that arc that is predicted to what the rifle is actually doing. So in simple terms, you're modifying your velocity. You're going to recalibrate the velocity that you got off the chronograph to what the bullet's actually doing. And what this will do, if you do it correctly, you true at that truing distance and then you test it out and make sure it's working, you will see that at various distances, 1,000, 900, 850, 720, whatever it is, that your bullets are like dead on, if not a tenth off. At this point, we've covered the rifle, we've covered some concepts and technical stuff that you need to understand for long-range shooting. But now let's dive into more of the art of long-range shooting, and that's the wind call. Reading a wind is essentially the art of long-range shooting, whereas the elevation and whatnot, that is more of the science. Because again, your elevation, pretty consistent, wind can affect it, and I'll go into that, but your wind calls will be dynamic. So with all that said, let me give you my approach to reading the wind. The first thing I'll do is take a wind call, and I'll do so with the Kestrel. So the Kestrel will give me a very accurate reading on what the wind is currently doing, how intense it is, and what direction it's coming from. So you take a wind call with the Kestrel, and you have a very precise scientific value for what the wind is doing at your position with regards to speed and direction. And now what you can do is analyze the target, what's going on downrange. Now you don't know what's happening at the target unless you set it up yourself. You can kind of game it and say, well, I was down there 30 minutes ago and the wind was going from east to west. My hat was coming off my head a little bit, so I'd say maybe like a 15-mile-per-hour wind. You can kind of game it that way. But let's say that you didn't do that. You didn't pay attention, or you didn't put the target out there that day. You need to look at what the environment's telling you. In the absence of a wind flag, windsock, you can look at what the vegetation's telling you. And this is dependent upon your environment. I live in the desert, and so I kind of have an idea of what the shrubbery is doing, how the speed of the wind affects it when it starts really moving. So I will set my parallax to that target, and I will analyze what my conditions are down there. I will look at if things are blowing, if dirt's moving along, what direction a tumbleweed is going, that kind of deal. And that's part of my calculation. Another thing as well is the mirage. When the mirage is boiling, meaning that it's climbing in a vertical orientation, that means that there's a 0 to maybe 3 or 4 mile per hour wind. Either there's no wind or there's very little, so the mirage, instead of being swayed, left or right, it's climbing vertically. That's your 0 to 4 mile per hour wind. You can analyze this. And when the wind starts picking up in intensity, that vertical climb will start becoming diagonal, left to right, whatever it is. And the more intense it is, the flatter it gets. Now, when it's diagonal, in my experience, it's around like a 5 to 10 mile per hour wind, maybe 5 to 9 really. And it starts to become flatter, almost like a river flowing. And you can tell the intensity of it after that because the lines of it become more fluid. They're not so big and wavy, but they're almost like a riverbed that's just running fast. And that's around like your 15, 20 plus mile per hour wind. So you can look at which direction the mirage is going from, left to right or right to left, and that can give you a really solid indication of that crosswind at the target. You can also do this between you and the target. If you're shooting 800 yards, find a landmark that's around 400 yards and set your parallax to that target and analyze the mirage. In short, what you're doing is you're creating like a 3-point computation of what you feel at the shooter, what the Kestrel is telling you and what you feel, what you can see at the target with vegetation, mirage, etc. And then you have the distance between you, which you can analyze again with mirage or other environmental cues. You might see the wind is gusting left to right down at the target, but between you and at the shooter, it's the opposite direction. This all kind of affects your call because you want that bullet to be not fighting the wind, but the wind is kind of guiding it off the target. That's a way to look at things. Another thing to discuss is what a full value, what a half value wind is. Full value, guys, is when the wind is coming from either a 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock or 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So this means that the wind, if it's gusting at 10 miles per hour, you're getting the full 10 miles per hour on that bullet. Now, if the wind is coming at, say, 1, 2 o'clock, 11, or 6 or 7 o'clock, that is closer to what we call a half value wind. We're keeping the same wind speed here, guys, 10 miles per hour, but since it's half value, the bullet will only be affected by really a 5 mile per hour wind. But essentially what we're talking about here with full value and half value winds is cosine. And when you have a Kestrel, that mathematical function is being done by the ballistic solver. That way you don't have to. But I'll put up an infographic here. You can see what a full value, half value wind is doing with regards to cosine and how you can do that math if you wanted to find out what that wind call should be. Speaking of headwind and tailwind, guys. Headwind, obviously the wind is coming towards you. Tailwind coming from behind you. And when it's coming from behind you, this is pretty great. All it's going to do is give your bullet a bit more perceived lift, meaning that it's not going to shift your bullet left or right really either way, but it means that you need less elevation to hit that same target. Now, if you have a headwind, it's going to do the opposite effect. A headwind is increasing the resistance of air on that bullet, meaning that you'll need a little bit more, not much, maybe a tenth or 2/10, depending on the distance, but you'll need a little bit more elevation to account for that added air resistance because of the headwind. So ideal conditions, you guys, is obviously no wind, but the second best condition to be in is a headwind or tailwind. And then when you understand your crosswinds, your half value, your full value, it also becomes a lot of fun shooting in the wind, because that's where the real challenge is. That's where the art of long range shooting is. And when you make a first round impact or a second round impact out at some long distance with a 3 mil wind hold because you did your computation right, you have the Kestrel, you looked at the Mirage, you made a call, a final judgment call, and you have that first or second round impact, man, it feels really good. To close the section on skills, let's just talk about fundamentals here for a brief minute. First and foremost is prone shooting. Prone shooting, if you can do it, you have the mobility, in your body and the physical capability. Prone shooting is the best. It's the most ideal way for you to have long range consistency as a shooter. You have tripod supported shooting, which very difficult, harder than it looks. Time and a place for it. You also have bench rest shooting, which again, time and a place for it. I recommend the form that you see here. It is very modern and very accurate to a comfortable position, how to set it. What I do personally is I find my target, and then I orient the muzzle of my rifle towards that target, and then I start building my position behind the rifle. So I will shoulder the rifle, make sure that my bipod, the feet are at the right elevation, and make sure that my bag is where it should be, and I'll get comfortable. From then on, I will align my body in sort of a Y shape. Legs spread out far to help absorb recoil and flatten things out, and then feet flat to the deck. It's a sign of a novice shooter when you see that their feet aren't flat to the ground. They're on their tippy toes, which on top of just increasing muscle tension in your body, which reduces your consistency and repeatability at targets. It could move, it could slip, whatever it is, that could throw off your shot. Whereas if they were flat, all these errors or potential for leakage in your stability are greatly minimized and reduced. So that's my philosophy on building a prone position. Maybe I'll put a video in here of how I do it. But when you have a good prone position, guys, you should be very comfortable. There should be little to no strain in your body whatsoever. Like, you're not having to crane your neck up or muscle anything or use too much tension in the bag, etc. It should all be very natural. And this is what ties into the natural point of aim. Natural point of aim is essentially that if you were to orient yourself, reticles on the target, that if you were to close your eyes for a few breaths, a couple seconds, whatever it is, and you open your eyes, you're still on the same target. You're not having to use any muscle or tension to make sure that happens. Sure, you might have to give a little tension to the bag for some added elevation or whatever it is, but that's totally fine. But when you break a shot, the only tension in your body should really just be the flexion in your finger to pull the trigger. That's it. Natural point of aim, there could be an entire video on that, but it's something to look into. If I'm shooting at 1,200 yards, I know I might hit it if my position is compromised, but I know I'm definitely not going to get a fast follow-up shot of any kind, or my likelihood of repeating that impact is greatly reduced because that position is compromised. So this applies even as well for zeroing. Just having that consistency, that repeatability in your position, it doesn't matter if you're prone, you're on a bench or a tripod, whatever it is, having that consistency and repeatability will only make you more accurate out to distance. I just want to hit on that. And one of the last things, guys, is your trigger follow through. When you break the shot, you guys, you're going to experience recoil, of course. So what you can do is use your bipod legs to bring some front forward pressure by pushing the rifle forward, and then using your bag to pull the rifle into you in a way. It's a push-pull dynamic that helps you absorb recoil. You just want to have leverage on the gun, guys, because as the gun has recoil, you're going to come off a target. And if you come off target too much for too long, you might miss the entire shot. You'll miss the trace, you'll miss the splash, or you'll miss the impact. You might forget what the hold was. So if you want to be repeatable, you don't want to hit the target just once off of some luck. You want to be consistent and be accurate. well, you need to make sure that you're following through beyond the trigger press. But last minute, beginner tips, things to avoid. Avoid getting sucked into the scope. You're not meant to be using max magnification at all times. You miss out on splash, you miss out on feedback, your eye relief gets tighter, the eye box gets smaller, all that stuff. Don't become addicted to magnification. Now, the other tip is not to buy too much gun. And I mean that in two ways. The first is, if you're skeptical about long-range shooting being right for you, don't rush out to buy an Accuracy International or a Barrett. Buy something that's more economical, so if you don't like it, it's not a huge hit. The other thing is not to buy too large of a caliber for your first bolt gun. Don't go out there and buy the first Ruger and 300 Win Mag just because it's $1,000. Not only is it expensive to feed that rifle, you're looking at, I don't know, $4 or $6 a round, but you have a very violent rifle. And for someone that lacks fundamentals, if you're a beginner, it's not ideal to learn on, especially because these rifles, those long action Magnum calibers, they excel at distance. So if you're shooting a 300 Win Mag at 700 yards, like you're not doing it right. And the last thing would be to train more. Go out there, get more repetitions, be analytical of what it is you're doing. Don't just go out there with the objective of hitting the target. You walked it in, you hit the target, job well done. Look at what corrections could have been made, what you could have done differently. Make every round count, and you'll see your hit probability go up astronomically fast. I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? You get better at it, and then you're in a position to help someone else, teach them, pass the torch. That's the whole purpose behind why I made the channel originally, was to give out free information, practical information that people could use to improve their skills and whatnot. But to speak on that, guys, with the channel, frequency uploads, all that kind of stuff. I understand it's been quite some time since I made my last upload. I think it's been 2 years or so. I'm a very busy guy. I have other priorities outside of YouTube, and I want to say that I really appreciate, I love that the videos have been so well received, and that I get so many messages on YouTube or Instagram. We love the videos. This was very helpful for me, and they have people asking questions. Like, I love interacting with you guys. That being said, I'm a busy person, so I try to make videos when I can. It takes a lot of effort to make these videos, not just the equipment and the money that goes into it, ammunition to get takes and whatnot, but just the time and the bandwidth. I love making these videos. With that being said, if you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below where you can get access to more content that doesn't make it onto YouTube, and just a better way to communicate with me if you want to talk about content of a video or ideas for future videos. I like interacting with you guys. So if you want to support the channel, that's the way to do so. Again, I appreciate your viewership very much. I enjoy making these videos, and that's it. I got nothing else for you. So go down in the comments, let me know what you guys think. What did I cover well? What would you want to see more about? What needs clarification? I try to read every comment. So yeah, go down there, let me know what you guys think. And as always, take care out there.